another one is Sulaiman. A very rare thing which I find for Singapore stories, because we have 2 Malay boys. So that's rare. But even more, we have 2 young Malay boys, and one of them is a dreamer, into fairy tales and stuff, so a real dreamer, and another one ran away from home, so it's short. So I'll try this one out. One night in Singapore, 38 years ago, when Ahmad Jaafar was a child, he found a twisted, rough tree with a hollow in the level of his eyes. The hollow was the size of a street lamp bulb, and standing on tiptoe, he saw that it was a cave with snake-smooth walls and a flat floor of wood dust. Ahmad Jaafar scraped a piece of green moss from an old stone wall nearby and fitted it onto the floor of his hollow. He plucked small toadstools from a rotted chunk of wood and planted them in patterns on the moss. He tore rose petals and jasmine petals, and after placing the shreds in his open palms, he blew them into the hollow where they settled gently in between the toadstools on the moss. And when the moon soaked the earth with a silver mist, he caught a shimmering dewdrop on a caladium leaf and tipped it onto the moss in the hollow. In the morning, we rushed to see if elves had danced in the place. Very unusual. Elves. They're not in Iceland. In a place he had prepared for them. But no one had been there. Not a thing had even sipped at the dewdrop among the flowers or the green moss in between the toadstools. And 2 days later he found a dead sparrow on the ground, lying on its back. Its legs were folded against its breast, and its eyes were covered with wrinkled grey skin. He placed the sparrow in the hollow and blocked it up with clay to keep out the elves. Now Sulaiman. When Sulaiman was a boy, 32 years ago, he packed a shirt and a nice cake in a bag. Before he left his house, he travelled in his mind to a country he had read about in his geography book. And then he slipped into his mother's room and kissed her sleeping cheek. He carried all his school books under his arm and walked to the beach and threw them into the sea, and he laughed loudly so that the night would understand his scorn for conventional things. And this happened. He walked down the road until he felt tired and decided to rest under a tree until his legs stopped aching. When he woke up, his clothes were damp with dew and his teeth rattled with the cold of the morning. When he reached home, his father and mother were still sleeping. He changed his clothes and hid like a frightened puppy under the folds of his blanket. He received a caning an hour later for losing his books, which had cost a total of $21.50. I tell you these things about Ahmad Jaafar and Sulaiman so that you may understand the nature of their real selves at a time when they were innocent, at a time before they walked through the passage of the years like a field of wild grass, their souls, like their trouser legs, pierced by hundreds of sharp yellow grass seeds, which they found difficult to brush off, because they had to be extracted one by one and gently. The grass seeds were deviated principles and ideals, studying their souls as they grew to be men in a world that forcibly changed them to what they are at this time. Today, Ahmad Jaafar is a confidence trickster, still serving a prison sentence. Sulaiman is in the civil service. So, the dreamer became a confidence trickster because society was not prepared for his dreams, his thoughts. And the fellow who ran away from home joined the civil service. And this is so, this is what I opened at one go, and I like. Thank you, Angus.
Perhaps kind of touches on on something that the uniqueness of these stories in some way, that they seem so different from anything that's being produced in Singapore at this time. Philip Holden from NUS has recently published, or is about to publish, a review of this book, very supportive and so forth. He's saying, oh, perhaps the closest thing I can say that Gregory Nalpon is like Lian Su in Ricky Star, perhaps, or perhaps If We Dream Too Long, those things. In a way, I'm not sure that I necessarily see that parallel so much. And also, Philip Holden said something that I thought was very interesting. I think it's a point worth making, that he thinks really these stories are more unsettling than political. But for me, maybe I'm projecting my own beefs and so forth and frustrations. But to me, Zero, just reading that, I think there's something inherently political, about what's going on in these stories. And also something that draws me to them. There's a friend of mine living in Europe who read some of these stories, and she's saying how wonderful they are, but they are so dark. And that's a question I think is quite interesting. Is there a kind of eldritch, weird quality about these stories? Where does that kind of darkness come from? That kind of fairy tale element, but quite unsettling fairy tale element. Once you know, it's unsettling because it's talking about Singapore, they're here and now, or then and there, or what is it kind of saying? And I'm still kind of struggling. But I think that's what makes these stories kind of like so, unsettling. But Singapore is an unsettling place, isn't it? You think, oh, we go outside, it's all very jolly, and we see lovely little statuettes of Ho Chi Minh and so forth, and the Singapore River, it all looks really nice and wonderful. If you look at Singapore in a kind of more mythological way, this is what did William Burroughs say about America? It's an old evil land. Whereas in Singapore, in some ways, when we think about the story of the swordfish, is Singapore a land that's, why is the soil red? It's bathed in the blood of innocence and so forth. Maybe in a way, sorry, I'm going off on one, I haven't drunk anything, but I'm saying something. But I'm going to say perhaps Gregory Nalpon is a bit weird, but maybe Singapore is weirder than we kind of expect to some degree. But to be a bit more serious arts housey. I was wondering, I feel very privileged that we have Edmund here, who in a way ultimately made this book possible, because he's the head ground, so it's really his word, his yay that made this kind of happen. I don't know, would it be possible to exploit you, Edmund? Would you be willing to come Sorry to do on the spot.
I urge you to read the book, that's all. I mean, we were so pleased when Angus approached us. We read the stories. We loved the stories. It's so unfortunate that Gregory Nalpon died. And the stories were not known. We released quite a number of books for the Singapore Writers Festival. Nearly 70, we published 17 titles just around 1 week during the Writers Festival. And we couldn't get Nalpon's book into the festival because it was not there. They would only take books of people who couldn't attend the festival. And obviously Gregory Nalpon was not there to attend, so he could. But subsequently I've tried to push the books to friends, various people, and it's quite universal, the response of people who have read. Everybody has said the stories are so lovely. I'm not sure whether the younger people would like it. People whom I obviously asked people around my age. And they all like the book. They all love the book. I know a person who, I met a friend, I said, you must read this book because there's this story about the loafer. And it's exactly like this friend we all know. And it's perfect. And I urge you to buy the book, help me sell the book. We really practically sold out. Not that sold a lot. We printed 500 copies and we practically sold out all 500. try to print 1,000 copies or 2,000 copies. The Singapore context. We can sell 2,000 copies of the book in Singapore. It's really very good. So we normally print 1,000 copies, and we find that we are left with 500. So it's nice to print 500 and be left with nothing. So we will, I think we will reprint more copies of this book when we can consolidate some other books that we also hopefully sell out and try to bring a few books together to save some money. I must say I'm honored to have published this book. It's a joy. The stories are so wonderful. I love them all. And I hope you enjoy reading the books too. Reading the stories. They really are wonderful. If you haven't read them, I urge you to read them. I really love these stories.
Thank you very much. At one stage, I was starting to doubt myself. It was very kind that Jacinta and Zero and the family were giving me all this material and so forth. But then I was starting to think to myself, is it just me? Will anyone else find these stories of interest? And if you look or get a chance to read the beginning, I got asked by the publishers to do this, but people from all over the place were willing to write very positive things about this book. They read the soft copy, they read the stories, and everyone seemed to warm to them in some ways. Edmund, a very famous writer here in Singapore, in some ways, quite a figure. His quote is on the front here. The stories are excellent, and he should know in some ways. I was very surprised to find out that he had actually sat in the coffee shops with Gregory Nalpon in the 1960s and 70s, and Gregory Nalpon had read the stories to him after rediffusion broadcasts and so forth, or radio broadcasts. There are so many people about, Patrick, I know I don't want to put the limelight on you again, but to think that there are so many people still around who knew and experienced Gregory Nalpon. In some ways, I just wonder, it might, the writing is wonderful, but there is also this point that I think in some ways Gregory Nalpon's life is so distinctive and different, just like Zero was just saying. It's all my fault, of course, the chronology is so bare and useless, but in a way perhaps it might be possible to write a short biography of Gregory Nalpon, because his life is kind of interesting. So maybe in the future that might be something that would be interesting to kind of look at. But one of the people who I sent the soft copy to and got back to me in a matter of hours, it seemed, that had read the book very quickly and came up with some very positive, but perhaps more importantly, kind of very perceptive comments, was a poet that I admire very much, Cyril Wong. And Cyril is of a younger generation of writers. Obviously, he was, not of the same generation of the people that we've just been talking about, who appreciate the stories. So it's great to hear from perhaps a younger generation appreciating these stories. So I wonder, Cyril, would you be willing to come forward and perhaps say a few words and maybe read something good?
I thought a few hours was right, because I read it very, very quickly, because it's so captivating. I think it's important to stress that Nalpon didn't just write stories, which is what struck me about this book. It's not all fiction and mythological stories. There are some very interesting treatises and essays about very unconventional subjects, which he does in a rather, dare I say, bitchy way. And one of this is a kind of essay, call it essay in quotation marks, in which he talks about what it means to be a true gentleman of leisure. And of course, like Angus said, like many of the stories, I wonder how much of Nalpon is in the story or in the essay. And also, I want to choose this passage, this very short passage of the treatise, because there's a kind of reflection on death as well, which I think is very important. So, gentleman of leisure. The good, true gentleman of leisure has to accept age